I'm Emma Albright, and this is Paris Calling. Today, Diariata N'Diaye, Nantes, France.
J'ai mes raisons, c'était soit ça, soit je perdais la raison. Et je dors et je raisonne, de toute façon je m'en fous, ça fait 20 ans que je suis dans le flou.
Si je demande à la plupart des gens, if I ask most people to give me definitions of verbal violence, material violence, psychological violence, physical violence, people generally know roughly what they are, but are unable to give a comprehensive definition. As for sexual violence, almost no one is able to give real definitions. So when we don't know what we're talking about, we don't know how to name something when we experience it, and we don't know how to name it when we witness it.
Et on ne sait pas les nommer quand on en est témoin.
Diariata N'Diaye is one of France's leaders in the battle against sexual violence. She's also a slam poet. This 42-year-old self-described artivist and founder of the Résonantes association channels her creativity to find new ways to connect to both victims and witnesses of gender-based and sexual violence. From her own experience of a forced marriage in Senegal, a moment that ignited her activism, to launching a smartphone app that helps those facing sexual violence, N'Diaye shares how she found her own voice and now helps others find theirs.
Lorsqu'on est victime de...
When you're a victim of violence or injustice in general, I think that what you have to keep in mind is that you can get through it despite everything. Of course, there are situations that are awful. Sometimes there are femicides, there are people who don't get out of these violent situations. But what I see is all the survivors. I think that's what we have to focus on, because life isn't a long, quiet river. And besides, it would be boring if it were. It's more about finding ways to get through it and get better. At Résonantes, we offer this path of artivism and optimistic fight. Since we have plenty of examples of people who have pulled through, we prefer to show them and remind people that yes, it is possible, rather than getting depressed and telling ourselves that we are not going to succeed.
De déprimer et de se dire qu'on va pas y arriver.
In this optimistic fight that Diariata N'Diaye is leading, both terms are equally important. It is a kind of positive-minded résistance that she has cultivated since she was a teenager. Born and raised in Saint-Dié-des-Vosges, a small city in eastern France, she is part of a well-established West African community, a dual culture that has shaped her personality.
C'est vrai que c'est assez étonnant de se dire...
It's true that it's quite surprising to think that there's such a large Senegalese Mauritanian community there. But it's because our dads were working in textile factories. And when the factories got relocated to eastern France, the families followed. These boo-boo boots, I think you only see them in the Vosges. When I say boo-boo boots, I'm talking here about the boo-boo robes our mothers wear and the boots that allow you to walk in the snow. I like to use this expression because I think it illustrates this dual culture well. Growing up in the Vosges region, well, I think there are nicer places to live, because in the east there's still a lot of racism. So I grew up in this somewhat strange atmosphere, but it was still a pleasant childhood. I come from a large family. There are 13 of us, brothers and sisters. Personally, I've always been open-minded. I had friends from other neighborhoods, from other towns. I grew up more like a French person with parents of foreign origin. With this dual culture, I was immersed in both France and Senegalese traditions. And indeed, there were things I liked about the French education and others I didn't. And then there were things that I liked about the Senegalese education and others that I liked less.
L'éducation à la sénégalaise et d'autres qui me plaisaient moins.
As a teenager, N'Diaye started writing songs about her own experiences, in particular about the traumas that affected her. Writing helped her put out the words that she couldn't say to anyone else.
Quand j'ai commencé à écrire,
when I started writing, it was for my own survival. It was simply because, instinctively, I found that writing allowed me to express myself, to say and explain what I couldn't say in real life, because I didn't have anyone I could trust. I think artists are people who have problems and who find solutions. That's what I did instinctively. When I was younger, I had health issues. And from the age of 10 and a half to 14 and a half, 15, I was in a medical center, away from my family. And in this medical center, I experienced some pretty difficult things with lots of children who had different illnesses. It ranged from diabetes to cystic fibrosis. I was confronted with the death of children very early on. It's something that's very hard to experience when you're young. And in that medical center, I suffered violence that I didn't talk about. I was really not well. That's when I started writing.
Et donc c'est à ce moment-là que j'ai commencé à écrire.
N'Diaye went back to live with her parents, but they were confronted, she says, to someone they didn't recognize or understand. Someone who was struggling. Drawing from their own experiences, they decided that it was best that she get married right away.
C'est quelque chose qui allait sans doute me...
It was something they thought would probably stabilize me, except that when you're born in France, it's a concept you don't know, you don't understand, and you reject it. I'd already received marriage proposals, which I rejected. I was trapped, so to speak. I went on vacation to my home country, Senegal, and when I got there, it was my wedding. My trip was planned for 15 days. I knew I had a return ticket. For me, the most important thing was to get back on the plane at the end of the 15 days. So I did everything right to make sure I would come back. I got married there and then I came back to France. And then that's when it started to get a little complicated for me because I had to end this marriage. I had to get rid of all this stuff. And it was quite conflicting, and that's what even led me to leave in the end.
Amené même à partir, finalement.
As soon as N'Diaye graduated from high school, she left the family nest in eastern France to work in the Paris region, and started getting more serious about her music and poetry.
J'ai commencé à raconter toutes
I started telling all these stories that were bothering me, that were making me feel bad, and actually telling in song all the misery I was feeling. And one day, I wrote a song about forced marriages that I performed at a national conference in Paris. And I met someone who really changed my whole life.
Je viens d'accepter d'épouser mon cousin, le vrai, le fils du frère de mon père. Pour eux, c'est un bon parti. Je n'étais pas partante, on dirait bien que je suis la perdante.
Je rencontre une femme qui s'appelle
I
Ernestine.
met a woman named Ernestine René, who runs the Seine-Saint-Denis Observatory on Violence Against Women, the first observatory in France on these subjects, who asked me a very simple question. This song is great. Do you have any other songs that talk about violence against women? And I didn't even realize how focused I was on these issues that concern women. And indeed, I had other songs that addressed the issue of violence. And that's how I found myself creating a show about violence and performing it for middle and high school students, simply because I've always been interested in this audience and because I remembered the student I used to be.
Coche la case, tradition, Occident, contradiction. Ma solution, le paraître, que faire donc apparaître, ce qu'ils veulent.
Moi, quand j'ai été mariée de force...
When I was forced into marriage at 15, it was during the summer, and when I went back to school, at no point did anyone talk to me about the violence, at no point did anyone offer me help, at no point did anyone ask me if I was okay. And I think deep down inside me, there was still a voice that was telling me that school had a role to play. So I created a show, performed it for school children, and that's when I discovered the extent of the phenomenon of violence. I knew it existed, but I didn't know it existed to this extent and that so many people were affected.
Autant de personnes concernées.
On stage, N'Diaye talks about violence through slam or spoken word. Her music becomes an educative and emancipation tool for young people, allowing them to free their voices and express themselves on difficult topics. In 2014, N'Diaye moved to the western city of Nantes, where she founded the association Résonantes, a name that refers to the city and the French word for network.
Quand on est face à une victime de...
When you're dealing with a victim of violence, there needs to be multiple people to help one person. We don't always have a lot of time when we have to talk about violence to an audience. It's an unpleasant subject, one that makes everyone uncomfortable, so we have to be strategic. I created Résonantes in 2015 with the idea of using art simply to save time. What we do is we create artistic tools for prevention, and we very quickly find ourselves with testimonies and victims of violence who are denouncing the violence they're experiencing for the first time. And so our role is to do the initial listening, to understand the situation, and to support all the victims we find out there in their efforts to escape the violent situations they're experiencing.
Vers la sortie des situations de violence qu'elles subissent.
In 2015, with the aim to extend support and awareness as far as possible, N'Diaye turned to technology.
On n'a pas la prétention
We don't claim to be able to speak to all the young people in France, to all the 15 to 24-year-olds in France, or to all the victims of violence, and so it was important to create a concrete digital tool. Because the phrase we hear and still hear today is that when faced with violence, you are not alone. But in reality, we very often are. We are very often alone simply because we don't know who to turn to. We don't know that structures exist. We don't know what lever to activate to get out of it. For me, creating a tool, whether it's digital or artistic, is the same thing. We're focusing on creativity, focusing on how we think of a tool that's useful to people in need so that they would no longer be truly alone. This tool is called Appel, a play on the words call for help, call for organizations, call your neighbor, call your loved ones.
Lors de vos déplacements au quotidien, à pied ou dans les transports, de jour comme de nuit, utilisez Appel. Appel, la première application de sécurité pour les femmes.
Il y avait vraiment cette idée de...
There was really this idea of allowing victims to rely on loved ones when they experience violent situations. So, with the Appel app and bracelet, you can register up to 3 trusted third parties. When someone is in difficulty or in a slightly unpleasant or stressful situation, such as traveling home in the evening, it can be complicated to be able to raise the alarm. So when the person triggers an alert on their bracelet, the trusted people hear what's happening live, they have real-time GPS tracking, they understand the person's situation, and if it's dangerous, they can call for help with very specific information. This alert is automatically recorded simply because we know that victims of violence are afraid of not being believed, and therefore having audio evidence of the situation they're experiencing gives them, at the very least, a little courage to report this violence. And for those who wish to file a complaint, it's evidence that's valid in court. And in reality, when you think about it, Résonantes in general is about offering answers to the problems we face. So the idea is to continue to be on the ground with victims, to understand what they're going through, and to try to find solutions. And that can happen through art, but it can also happen through digital technology.
Ça peut aussi passer par le numérique.
Raising awareness against sexual violence has to start early in school, for the victims, but also for the witnesses.
Nous, on pense que de toute façon...
We believe that seriously and significantly reducing violence will happen through education. The reason we work with young people aged 15 to 24 is simply because we realize that at no point in life do we talk about violence. It seems that we only hear about it when we see offenses or crimes on TV, we hear about it in movies, we see representations of violence, but in reality, at no point in our lives are we given definitions of the different forms of violence. And then above all, sometimes there are perpetrators but who don't know it, and this is true among young people. A simple example, things that are considered games are actually sexual assaults. In middle school, there are many boys who have fun touching girls' buttocks when they are going up the stairs or in gym class. There's also what we call the olive game. It's the act of poking someone's anus as a prank. It comes from the hugely popular Naruto manga. It's a scene in the manga that's supposed to be funny, but in reality, if we had to give names to define all this, it's sexual assault. And so just saying it raises real awareness among the public.
Je n'ai rien dit, j'étais surpris, je n'avais pas compris ce qui leur avait pris. Dans mon cœur, j'étais vexée. Je me suis retenue de pleurer, ça m'a fait comme un coup, et la maîtresse n'a rien vu du tout.
Ce qui est rassurant, c'est de se dire...
What's reassuring is that we don't need to explain things 50,000 times. Once it's said, it's generally heard and understood. In reality, when you say to a young person who's having fun playing the olive game, you're a sexual aggressor, it's not pleasant to hear. It allows them to realize that it's not a game. And so we realize that it's important to educate people, to make them aware, and to also remind them of what they have the right to do and what they don't. In reality, very few parents instill this in their children because most parents only imagine their children as potential victims, never as potential perpetrators. We often ask them if they're okay, if no one is bothering them, but at no point do we ask them how they behave with others because we assume they're our children, so they behave well.
La maîtresse ne voyait rien. Mes camarades ne disaient rien. Arsène et Marcel me traitaient comme un moins que rien, donc moi non plus, je ne disais rien. J'étais seule tous les jours et aussi la nuit.
Si on part du principe que tout le monde sait
If we assume that everyone knows what violence is, no one will be able to say, I didn't know, I didn't do it on purpose. Then there are all the perpetrators who know exactly what they're doing, and that's another issue. Education is essential, and especially for our audiences, it's because we practice prevention that we find ourselves detecting victims. When you're young and a victim of violence, the only people who talk to you about violence are the perpetrators, and the perpetrators say to keep quiet. So it's important to have a counter-narrative and help identify victims, rather than wait until they're 30, 35 or 40 years old, until they find themselves in violent relationships, before taking them into care, even though the violence began when they were children.
prendre en charge alors que les violences ont commencé quand elles étaient enfants.
Paris Calling is a World Crunch podcast. Post-production is done by Anne-Sophie Goninet, interview by Bertrand Auger, and narration is by me, Emma Albright. Editing is by Jeff Israeli with creative assistance by Rebecca Bontheus and Anne-Sophie Goninet. Credit to Dilem for music used in this production. Voice matching software was used in the creation of English language audio of Diariata N'Diaye. With each episode of Paris Calling, we discover someone else somewhere else. Support us with likes, shares, and ratings on your favorite platforms.